Hello everyone, it's Livia here, aka Story Minded, and I'm just going to make the next video. This is for another creative writing module, True Stories, and this was the first assignment for the True Stories module. True Stories is I'm going to keep saying it. True Stories is a creative writing module that I'm currently taking in my first year at uni, and it's all to do with life writing, autobiographical writing, stories that are inspired by our lives, which can be quite a daunting prospect when you think about it, but I don't really mind. I think like anything that influences you or inspires you to write can only be a positive thing. And for this unit, our first assignment was we had to create a poetry portfolio of 5 poems, and the only sort of brief was that all the poems had to be inspired by our life in some way. And then later on, our lecturer suddenly revealed, even though it didn't, I don't think it really clearly depicted it in the handbook, but she suddenly was like, oh yeah, but by the way, you need to try and the marker, because this lecturer who we had, she's leaving. She was like, the examiner is going to want to see that you use like lots of different techniques. And I thought, well, yeah, that's fair enough. But then she was also like, the forms of the actual poems themselves need to be quite different, because originally I had done it all like free verse poetry because there hadn't really been any stipulations, and also another one to meet the brief, it could only be like a single page of poetry, so you didn't have room to do like, unless it like formed a part of the sequence, but you had to sort of negotiate that with your lecturer and everything. And I thought, I just can't be bothered to do that because I had so many other assignments on at the same time. I was like, a single page of poetry, that is going to be challenging enough, let alone trying to do a whole massive sequence thing. So my poetry collection I didn't give it a name. I just submitted it as the poetry portfolio because I just thought I can't think of a name for the whole collection, and it's just, usually I would give my poetry collection a name, but I thought it sort of said just submit as poetry portfolio, so I thought I'm just gonna do that. But oh god, now I'm gonna have to remember the poems. So I ended up doing like a villanelle. Like all my first drafts were free verse, but then I started to play with some of the forms. So she said at least 2 or 3 different forms, so I ended up doing quite a few free verses, but in different styles. So one was like meant to be like an epistolary style, so it was like it had no stanzas, it was just a straight piece of poetry that was meant to be like a letter. And then the other 3 verses I used like different techniques, like one of them was more metaphorical and stuff like that. And I also did a sonnet form when I revised it. So anyway, one of the first poems that's in the collection is called The Scary Place, and it's a really personal poem, and I was really proud of it. Like the final version of that poem, I think it's my strongest one in the whole collection. I shared it with the workshop group and I ended up having tears, which was great. My lecturer didn't even notice. I was just like sobbing and breaking down in front of these group of people that I didn't really know, and it was like oh damn it. But it's because I took inspiration from my dad and his frontotemporal dementia, and it's always been such a challenge and struggle for me to convey what I experienced. And I think poetry, I never really thought about. Like, when I was younger, I used to try and write some poems about my dad just to try and, express and deal with it, but I don't really think I had the maturity to do that at the time, and I just always used to feel whatever I would write would feel fake, and I would get really angry because I couldn't give voice to what I went through. But with this villanelle, I managed to find a beautiful poem for inspiration by Dylan Thomas, I believe it was, and it was a villanelle, and I think it's called Do Not Go So Gentle Into That Good Night, and it's about, I don't know if it's his dad personally or if it was like, it's the narrative voice, but the narrative voice is talking about their dad, and it was such a beautiful poem, and I almost cried when I read it, and I was like, this is the form that I need to use. And what I wanted to do with this poem was write it from like almost like a childlike narrative, but then kind of towards the end the voice does have a bit more adult language that comes out, but I sort of justified that in my like the first draft and the annotated draft bits by saying that like I was sort of 11 when he passed away, and it's like, I think naturally, and I am an adult myself, so that voice is always going to come through slightly, but I still try to convey my understanding of dementia in like a childish way. So this idea of like the brain being split and stuff like that. And I think the reason why I went for the Villanelle form is it's so powerful. It has like repeating lines, and obviously and it's like interlocking rhyme, but it like the layers of the lines repeat throughout the poem. So I had this repetition of like the scary place, and it was I tried to use very simplistic, stripped back language, and I kind of wanted to talk about the care home. In the original poem, it was way too long, and it didn't feel right. And I'm so pleased that I did some research and managed to find that Villanelle, and it completely transformed the poem, and it was so much more powerful. Even people in my workshop group were crying. I was like, oh no, I've just killed the mood. So that's like the scary place, and I would read it out, but I'm not going to read it out because I'm not going to read it out, but I was really happy with it. And this might not necessarily be, like, that's definitely the first poem in the collection, and I try to structure them in a sort of chronological way to sort of make it like a collection, but I can't remember the order off the top of my head, so I'm just going to have to say the other poems. I'll skip to the end. I know what the last poem in the collection is. It was actually from an exercise we did in class, and it's like, I called it Dear 85-year-old Me, and it's like writing a letter to your future self. And I revised that, and that one I was quite happy with in the end. That's the one that was the epistolary style, where I tried to make it like a letter, and it's kind of just me thinking about, have I become a published author? Am I content with my life? What are my nieces doing? Stuff like that. So that was kind of like not a reflection, because that's looking back, but it was like almost like a projection of what will my future be, and will I be happy, kind of thing. And this idea of writing, and that's what I changed in the first draft. I kind of lost that connection, and I was like, I want to make it more about writing and stuff, so I added that in. I did one about my horse, Alaska. That was a more happy poem. Originally, once again, it was a free verse and it was way too long, so I changed it into a sonnet form because I like the idea of playing with the form, like, rather than the traditional sonnet being about love or power or like political motivation. I decided to do it about my horse, and that was a really nice one, and just kind of about the like relationship we have, and the just kind of like that, because that's a very personal aspect of my life. So I did a poem about Alaska and simply called it Alaska. I did one about my mum, which is like a free verse to her, but this one has stanzas, and sort of about her life and the stories she used to tell me about when she was younger. My granddad worked in the RAF, and because of his job, they would travel around a lot and travel around the world, and she never really stayed in one place for too long, so I kind of opened the poem with that idea and just exploring different images and different things that she told me about. So that was a really nice poem to do. And then there's one more. I'm going to pause the video a second and think what that one is. I'm trying to think. Yay, it's going to let me do it. Sorry, I'm just going to quickly pop on and find that's the wrong document. No, it wasn't. Just want to try and find what that last poem is, because for the life of me I cannot remember, so I'm really sorry. Yep, so we've got Scary Place, then the mum poem, then that was it, Enclosed. So Enclosed was a poem that I did about my creative frustration that I can experience. This was the very metaphorical one. It was a free verse about my frustration when I can't create, like that idea of writer's block, and just kind of the original draft, it was very symbolic. Once again, this was inspired by a sort of a creative writing task that we had to do in class, and it was like a prose piece, then it was transformed into a poem, and sort of originally it was a prose piece, but I transformed it into a poem. And it was just this idea that, do I have anything of value to say as a writer when all the words have been used? And it's quite more of a like pessimistic kind of poem, and I just really enjoyed exploring it, and it's quite symbolic. But in my original draft, I realised I was using the symbolism didn't tie in directly with writing, and that's what I revised in my second draft, because I thought this isn't the message I'm trying to get across. Like originally I had the idea of like these dried up and empty paint pots, but then I'm like, that's more like an artist with paint, and I was like, I don't like that because that's not linked with writing, so I changed it to crumpled paper and stuff like that. So anyway, that was about my poetry portfolio. I would read some of the poems, but I would really like to read The Scary Place, but I don't think I want to share it because it's a very personal poem, although on my YouTube channel I have shared a poem that I wrote in college, and I mean The Scary Place completely like smashes that one in comparison, because The Scary Place is probably the most authentic piece of writing I've ever been able to write about my dad. So hopefully the poetry portfolio will be a success, but once again I haven't got those grades yet, so I don't know. And if anyone's watched this, thank you, and if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Bye.